They will set the pattern for who is going to run in 2024 based upon what happens now in the midterms in 2022.
Early voting for the midterm elections begins with heavy turnout already projected. A look at what's important to Catholic voters and which issues are getting the faithful to the polls.
4 years later, I went to her graduation and she had a beautiful little boy that was at the graduation with us. So that's just one of a list of women that we've helped.
The work of pregnancy help centers. We talk to those who are on the front lines of providing support to both young mothers and their children as political attacks and vandalism are on the rise.
Precisely 1 month before Vatican II opened, John the 23rd said, point blank, the purpose of the council is evangelization. It's not reinventing the church.
Vatican II, 60 years and 6 decades of controversy later. A leading expert helps us decipher its meaning and the impact on the church it has redefined. And on World Mission Day, a commitment to spread the good news, a celebration of missionaries embarking on their worldwide journeys. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
The only sure way to stop these extremist laws that are put in jeopardy women's health and rights is for Congress to pass a law. And I've said before, the court got Roe right nearly 50 years ago, and I believe Congress should codify Roe once and for all.
President Joe Biden promising to legalize abortion nationally, guaranteeing it as a federal constitutional right, as Democrats try to rally voters for the midterm elections. Welcome to EWTN News In Depth. The midterm elections are just weeks away. Early voting is underway, and although these elections typically attract less attention, this year there are predictions of record turnout at the polls. In fact, 99% of Catholics who responded to the most recent EWTN Real Clear Opinion poll said they plan to vote in the 2022 midterms. And the stakes are high, not only for the states, but for the federal government, too. The Biden administration could face a stalemate should Republicans gain congressional control. We're focusing our coverage in the next few weeks on 4 main areas of these midterm elections, including the Senate and House races that could reshape Congress, attorneys general elections, ballot initiatives, and governor elections that could impact the future of state laws. The current U.S. Senate is composed of 50 Republicans, 48 Democrats, and 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats. Vice President Kamala Harris casts a vote for the Democrats in case of a tie. Of those Senate seats, 34 are up for election next month. 14 Democrat seats highlighted in blue and 20 Republican seats highlighted in red on this map. In the House of Representatives, Democrats currently hold more seats, 220, compared to the Republican minority that holds 212 seats. 3 seats of the 435 seats are vacant. The 2020 census caused a shift in the House, with several states gaining or losing some seats. This map shows current open seats of outgoing incumbents. Blue represents Democrats, red Republicans. And newly created seats after the 2020 census are shown in yellow.
Here's where you're really going to see a major change in policy, depending upon the congressional makeup. I mean, that's the major area. And at this point, because the legislation is more important than anything else at this point. Clearly, if there is a switch from Democrat to Republican, you're going to see much more conservative legislation be passed. Gubernatorial races, senatorial races, and congressional races at this point will tell the tale in the end, and they will be the lead-in to what's going to happen in 2024.
The Senate and House seats are vital in determining the national and global policy direction our country will take, including international trade, foreign policy, immigration, and more. But hitting closer to home, an often overlooked category, state attorneys general races. AGs are responsible for enforcing state laws and advising state governments on legal matters. Voters will cast a ballot for Attorney General in 30 states, highlighted on this map. Incumbents or most recent incumbents' political affiliation is indicated by red for Republicans and blue for Democrats. President Biden's approval rating is hovering at 40%, according to a two-day national Reuters poll. A low approval rating for presidents is historically not a good sign for his party during midterm elections. An EWTN Real Clear Opinion poll surveying some 1,500 Catholics in September shows 47% strongly disapprove of how the president is handling the job and 14% strongly approve of the job he's doing. Despite those numbers, our poll was close when we asked Catholics what party they would vote for in the upcoming elections. Nearly 45% say they would vote Democrat, almost 49% said Republican, with more than 6% saying they were unsure. Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, director of the Conscience Project and fellow at the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America, joins us now to talk about the midterm elections from a Catholic perspective. It's so great to have you here with us. What are you hearing from Catholics in your work at the Institute for Human Ecology? And tell us a little bit about your center's significance for the midterms.
Well, Montse, thanks for having me on. I'm hearing that people are very, very interested in what's going on in the midterms and beyond. And at the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University, we want to help people become informed about what's being presented to them in the public square and tap into that great intellectual tradition that our Catholic Church has offered throughout the generations. We've got programming, we've got academic programs, as well as events, as well as our scholars and fellows are engaging in these hot topic issues with the media and trying to add and contribute to our conversations in order to, as Pope St. Leo XIII said upon the charge of the Catholic University of America, to give to the Republic her best citizens.
And you do this often, writing about legal issues that are facing the Catholic community. Andrea, the September EWTN Real Clear Opinion poll found that 34% of Catholics think inflation is the most important issue facing our nation. The economy and jobs are following that. Why aren't issues of morality higher on the list?
Well, I always think that polls give us a snapshot, and maybe it's a top priority. I know as a mother of many, I'm concerned about making my budget and meet with the needs of my family, but it doesn't mean that I'm not concerned about issues of religious freedom, the sanctity of life, human dignity. All of these issues are on the ballot in these midterm elections, and even after the elections, we need to hold our elected officials accountable and praise those that are advancing the common good.
You touched on something else that we did ask about in the polling. If voters are more or less likely to support a candidate who agrees with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, allowing each state to determine its own abortion policy. Those numbers are very close, hovering at 42% opposed and in favor, and 16% not sure. How do Catholic voters view the issue of abortion?
Well, I think that our Catholic Church gives us guidance. We know that the unborn are to be protected, both in our own homes, in our families, and in our society. And so the Supreme Court's decision passing this to the states is a really important wake-up call for all of us to be able to share the information that we have learned through our faith, through our church, about the dignity of all human beings from conception to natural death. And we're going to see this playing out in these midterm elections.
And the Catholic vote is mentioned, I say that in quotations. It's also mentioned because 1 in 5 Americans affiliate with the church in some way, even if they're not practicing. Is there really such a thing as the Catholic vote?
Well, I think if there is anything called the Catholic vote, it should be that Catholics take our responsibility as citizens seriously. We need to first be well informed of what's going on. And second, we need to engage. Civic engagement among Catholics is more important than ever. We need to be Catholics in the public square. And that will help both our society and our church to thrive.
Have Catholics done that in the past? Are they influencing the votes at the polls?
Well, I think our history in our country in particular shows incredible presence of Catholics since our founding up into recent times. And it should be the inspiration that each one of us take. We're not to be silenced. We're not to be despondent, for sure not to be despondent. And we shouldn't be dragged down by secularism advanced by progressives. And we also need to be mindful to avoid sectarianism. We are living in a beautiful pluralistic country, and we should be able to encourage people to pursue the truths that we know are founded in the Catholic Church.
One last question for you about the midterms and ballot initiatives. Kansas was a big failure for the pro-life movement, and everyone has their eyes turned to Proposition 1 in California, the no vote that could save a lot of lives. Is this something that you think is front and center for a lot of people, a lot of Catholics in particular?
Well, I think all of these states. I grew up in Michigan, and the issue of abortion is on the ballot there as well. We need to be paying attention to each of our states, state governor positions and elections, state attorney generals, and particularly there are a number of state Supreme Court positions that are up for vote. We need to be informed, and we need to take our concerns to the ballot and to the voting place with us.
Well, we look forward to hearing more about that from you. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Montse, thanks for having me on.
Such a pleasure. For more information on the upcoming election and our EWTN Real Clear Opinion poll on the election, check out our sister news organizations, the Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register. Our coverage of the midterm elections continues next week when we'll take a closer look at key governors' races and statewide ballot initiatives. Next, pro-life politics, as lawmakers from opposing sides put the focus on pregnancy help centers. There's much more ahead on EWTN News In Depth. Stay right there.
The pregnancy care centers are one of the most magnificent manifestations of compassion and love I have ever seen. And they do it selflessly. They do it just because they care for mom and baby.
Pregnancy care centers dragged into the political arena will explore both the vandalism and the congressional challenges they now face.
This is reality. It's hyper-realism.
And we go to Spain for the opening of a new exhibit based on the Shroud of Turin. After years of study, researchers present a very realistic creation of Christ's body after the crucifixion. And later, we celebrate the missionary as we take you to a joyous festival in Rome, honoring those proclaiming the gospel around the world.
The common messaging from that kind of terrorism is if abortion isn't safe, neither are you. That's a very direct thing.
We continue to see fallout from the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, with attacks on pro-life pregnancy centers from vandals and verbal challenges from lawmakers. Protesters are waging pro-life and pro-abortion arguments in the streets. Major corporations are getting involved, and battles are playing out in the courtroom. And on Capitol Hill, the national divide on abortion is reflected by lawmakers on both sides of the issue. Reporter Roselle Regis explains the battle brewing around pro-life pregnancy centers.
We must do everything we can to ensure that patients get the health care and reproductive services that they need. And that includes protecting patients from the deceptive practices of some so-called crisis pregnancy centers, or CPCs.
We don't understand why someone is critical of people like us who are providing for the needs of people who choose life for their child.
Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts introduced the Stop Anti-Abortion Disinformation Act in July, which directs the Federal Trade Commission to prohibit advertising that dissuades patients from getting an abortion.
CPCs often lure women into their facilities by advertising themselves as comprehensive reproductive health care providers. But this is flatly untrue. Many of these CPCs are not healthcare providers, and they often operate specifically to deceive pregnant women with the goal of preventing them from having abortions.
Warren and 6 other Democratic senators sent a letter to Heartbeat International, an organization that serves more than 2,800 affiliated pregnancy centers, maternity homes, and adoption agencies worldwide. They expressed their concern about patient privacy, including the lack of HIPAA regulations for these centers, saying data could be used in abortion-related prosecutions.
We know confidentiality is important, and we will continue to serve those that give us the opportunity and trust us with that confidential information.
The president of Heartbeat International pushed back, saying the organization's operations are safe, secure, and legal.
We've been doing this for 50 plus years, and we've interacted with many, many women, even millions, I would say. And this has not been an issue that has arisen. It's really disheartening to see these Democrat senators are spending really any time really concerned with us or focusing on the pregnancy help movement, when they should really be directing their energies and efforts to find new ways to help women not need abortion.
Janet Durig has been running Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center for almost 20 years. It provides clothing, parenting classes, diapers, and more for mothers in need.
I think it's life-changing. I think it helps a mother who is socioeconomically challenged, for instance, to be able to keep a baby she really wants.
Her center was recently the target of vandalism. Security guards are now needed for the first time in 20 years.
When did keeping your baby stop being one of the choices? It's as if that's not supposed to be a choice anymore.
In response to pro-life center attacks, Republican Representatives Chris Smith and Kathy McMorris Rogers introduced the Protect Pregnancy Care Centers Act of 2022. The bill would require the Biden administration to publicly disclose how it's handling investigations and prosecutions on pregnancy center attacks.
We have sent letters to the Department of Justice, to Garland, and to Mayorkas, and to the president, asking what are they doing? How are they enforcing the law? And we got, in one case, one little paragraph says we're looking into answering your question. And frankly, what we're seeing with local and federal lack of enforcement, the pregnancy care centers, to get back to that, are just being firebombed, and people are looking into it. Well, we need results. These are very dangerous organizations, and the people behind them are committed to violence.
40 House and Senate Republicans have also sent a letter to the FBI, accusing the Bureau of misusing the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or FACE Act, which is designed to protect abortion clinics as well as pro-life clinics. In the letter, the members point out the recent rise of FBI investigations into pro-life protesters, but a lack of announced arrest in pregnancy center attacks. Rosal Regis, EWTN News in Depth.
There are a lot of moving parts on Capitol Hill related to abortion and pro-life pregnancy centers. Rosal joins us now in studio. Rosal, what are you hearing from everyday Catholics on this issue?
Well, according to a recent EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion research poll, some 67% of Catholic voters support public funding for pregnancy resource centers, while 18% are opposed, and the remainder are not sure.
What about the role of Catholic church leaders? Are Catholics generally underwhelmed by their performance on this issue?
That's a good question, Montse. We saw similar numbers when we asked about the violence against pro-life centers and if political and church leaders should be more vocal about the recent attacks and vandalism. Nearly 62% say that political and church leaders should be speaking out against the recent attacks and acts of vandalism on pregnancy resource centers, compared to 15% who say they should not, and another 23% who are not sure.
Thank you so much, Rosal. We'll continue to track the different angles of the story and see how it evolves over the coming months. We'll be right back.
You cannot ever forget that the Second Vatican Council was given to the world church exactly when Western civilization was coming apart at the seams. So there's not a whole lot of, there was no calm cultural moment in which to receive this.
Vatican II, understanding its impact. On its 60th anniversary, we talked to leading church scholar George Weigel. His reflections on why the council was so very necessary when we return.
Pope John, calling the council, prayed for the coming of the Holy Spirit, that the Second Vatican Council would be a new Pentecost, really sending the church out energized, re-energized into the world of today, like the apostles went out on the first day of Pentecost.
Re-energizing the church and answering the call to universal holiness, to spread the eternal truth in a drastically changing world. Welcome back to EWTN News in Depth. This month marks the 60th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council. Last week, we heard from Father McPartlin and other experts on Vatican II about the Council's inspiration, its message, and the discordant responses it received from Catholics. In its 4 years, the Second Ecumenical Council, or Vatican II, released 4 constitutions, 9 decrees, and 3 declarations that introduced numerous reforms to the liturgy, church leadership, the role of the laity, religious liberty, and the church's interactions with other Christian denominations, non-Christian religions, and secular society. We continue the discussion on the Second Vatican Council with George Weigel, author, theologian, and distinguished senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. His most recent book, To Sanctify the World, argues why the Second Vatican Council was necessary for the Church. I recently spoke with him about the intent and significance of Vatican II. Here's George Weigel on the record. George, it's so wonderful to have you here with us to discuss your new book, Sanctifying the World. Tell us a little bit about what your main point was. You said Vatican II was definitely necessary.
There are 3 main points in To Sanctify the World. First, an exploration of why the council was necessary and what Pope John XXIII intended the council to be. Secondly, a review of what the council actually taught and what I hope is a kind of user or reader-friendly language. And then third, an exploration of how 2 men of the council, who later became popes, John Paul II and Benedict XVI, gave us the keys to the proper interpretation of Vatican II.
You talk about this legacy and the importance of John XXIII, the good pope. Tell us a little bit more about why it's important to understand who he was, to understand the council.
I think John XXIII was a man with an important insight into the trauma of late modernity, of the mid-20th century. And he knew that the church needed to revitalize itself, to rekindle its Christ-centered faith in order to respond to that trauma, which after all, in the first 6 decades of the 20th century had produced 2 world wars, 3 totalitarian systems, oceans of blood, mountains of corpses, greatest persecution of the church in history. We had to be able to say something to that. And we had to be able to say it in a way that the modern world could hear. That was the intention of Vatican II.
And he lived that.
Yes, he did. He had a different path to the papacy than many of his predecessors. He was from a very different social class. He was the son of peasant farmers in northern Italy. He had a different diplomatic experience. He had worked in the Balkans, in non-Catholic areas. He had been the papal nuncio to France after the Second World War, and saw how distressed that local church was. So he brought to the papacy a different set of understandings or a distinctive set of understandings of what was going on in the mid-20th century. And he also brought a historian's optic on this. He was not a doctor of theology. He was not a doctor of canon law. He was a historian.
So he wasn't interested in changing the church, but preparing the church to engage with the outside world?
This is the single biggest misunderstanding of Vatican II. Vatican II was not called to fundamentally change the church or reinvent Catholicism. It was to renovate the church's presentation of the enduring truths of Catholic faith so that the church could get about converting the world, not imitating the world.
Let's talk about these renovations. The most obvious one is the one that affected all of the faithful, the change from Latin to the vernacular. Tell us a little bit more about what that looked like for people and what it was supposed to look like.
I don't think that's the primary change, frankly. And I think we cannot understand the intention of the Constitution on the liturgy until we understand the 2 prior, in the authoritative sense of prior, documents of the Council. Constitution on Divine Revelation said, God does speak into history. We do not live in a world of silence. And we are configured so that we can hear that. Human beings are more than congealed stardust. The dogmatic Constitution on the Church said the Church is the template for understanding the true unity of the human race, which is that we come from God and are destined for God. Now, where does the liturgy fit into that? What the Constitution on the liturgy was meant to do is to teach a disenchanted modern world that was nonetheless worshiping something. It was worshiping money, or it was worshiping the dictatorship of the proletariat, or it was worshiping Adolf Hitler, or whatever. That the one worthy of worship is the one who can make our worship fulfill our desires for happiness and beatitude. And the council proposed an organic development of the church's way of worship, so that the Mass would not be simply something that the priest does and people watch. That is not a proper understanding of liturgy. You haven't understood what Christian worship really is. Now, all sorts of implementation issues for that, which we're all familiar with, but in the living parts of the world church today, the silly season is over, the worship of the church is gradually becoming what the Second Vatican Council intended it to be.
You say gradually. How much time do you think it will take?
I think it's going to take another several generations for this to sort out, and that's why I think it was very unfortunate that these severe restrictions were put on the celebration of the old rite, because the celebration of the old rite was helping the new rite become more sacred. Was helping to sacralize and intensify the new rite. And it was a shame to try to cut off that process of mutual enrichment there.
The misconceptions around ecumenicalism. A lot of people are fearful of what happens. We really pray for these things twice as a church. Christian unity, there's a whole week associated with it here in the United States, and also during the prayers of the faithful in the Easter Vigil. We talk about Christian unity. What did the council intend for the definition of that?
The unity that Christ promised the church would be recomposed, if you will, around the Catholic Church. What the Catholic Church, what the council said, was that everyone who is properly baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit is a member of the one Church of Christ. And they are in different degrees of communion with the Catholic Church, which is the fullest expression in history of that one Church of Christ. I think perhaps the greatest interreligious success of the Council has been reconfiguring the Church's relationship to living Judaism,
the Jewish
where
community.
there are real conversations going on of a sort that have not happened for maybe 1900 years.
We've talked about Nostra Aetate on this show. Tell us a little bit more about why that relationship with the Jewish community and restoring it is so important to the church.
Well, because they're our parents. Christianity is the child of Judaism. Jesus was a faithful Jew. The first Christian evangelists were all Jews. There's some divinely mandated or willed entanglement here that, as St. Paul says, and the council reaffirmed, we're never going to really understand till the end of history. But we can be in conversation with each other here and now, and we can bear a common witness to the moral truths that were first revealed to the world through the people of Israel.
You talk about the people of Israel. That obviously becomes very political very fast. What does Vatican II teach us about how we can think about that?
Well, the Jewish people and the state of Israel are two different things, but the state of Israel means a great deal to Jewish people. I mean, it should mean a great deal to anybody who believes in democracy. It's the only functioning democracy in that part of the world. And the last time I was in Jerusalem in 2015, I found something very interesting. This is my 5th time in the Holy Land. I found something very interesting that I'd never found before. That was young, modern Orthodox Jews who were interested in talking to Catholics about developing a religious defense of democracy, and thinking they might learn something from the 200-year Catholic struggle to wrap our heads around the idea of democracy. That just hadn't been my experience before. And that's a whole new line of Jewish-Christian dialogue that could be very important in the future.
You're most well known for your work in sharing the legacy
of John Paul II. A beautiful, beautiful legacy, which is, I know for my generation, the reason that we're so on fire for Christ. How is this a continuation of that great work?
Well, John Paul II was very much a man of the Second Vatican Council. The centerpiece of his pontificates, what he said the day after he was elected. What I'm going to do for as long as I'm here is make sure that the Second Vatican Council is properly received and implemented in the church. So I think he would be happy that I did this and drew on his work in explaining this.
Pope Benedict XVI is still with us. How would you say that this is also a little bit of a hat tip to him?
I saw the Pope Emeritus a few years ago. We had a long and very pleasant conversation, and I assured him that I would do whatever I could to make sure that his hermeneutic, his interpretation of the council, was a council of continuity, reform and continuity, or continuity leading to reform, would get a fair hearing. And I hope this book has done that.
Thank you so much, George.
You're welcome.
To hear more of my conversation with George Weigel, including more on his book and his thoughts on the German Synodal Way, find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. There's a lot going on this week. Top news headlines are next.
A lot of them fear, like, spend the next 10 years of my life in prison, or just kind of let this, broken femur heal on its own.
Chaos in the streets across Iran. Citizens are injured, killed, and beaten as they protest the morality police. We talked to a leading expert about the uprising challenging Iran's Islamic government. And the TV newswoman fired from her job after volunteering for a pro-life cause in her off hours. That and more in the Week in Review. An extension on an important Vatican initiative tops the Week in Review. There will now be one more year to formulate findings from the Pope's Synod on Synodality, undertaken worldwide to solicit feedback from the faithful about the Church. Pope Francis announced during his Angelus last Sunday that the Synod would be extended to 2024. That will divide the phase known as the Synod of Bishops into two sessions, one a year from now and the next in October 2024. There has been some concern that small percentages of Catholics participated in the diocesan phase, where initial feedback was gathered. The pontiff says the extension will make the process less rushed and allow for a more relaxed period of discernment. A major survey of Catholic priests finds that while a high percentage of priests enjoy a higher than average level of well-being, including mental and physical health, a sense of purpose, and close social relationships, a significant percentage of them have issues of burnout and fears of being falsely accused of misconduct. A research group at the Catholic University of America called The Catholic Project spoke with more than 3,500 priests across the U.S. and found that 45% of them report at least one symptom of ministry burnout. It was found to impact diocesan priests more than religious priests, and younger priests much more than older priests. In the wake of the sex abuse scandal, 82% of priests say they strongly agree that they regularly fear being falsely accused of sexual abuse. The study also found that trust in leadership was low. Only 49% of diocesan priests expressed confidence in their bishop. For solutions, priests in the survey suggested bishops strengthen their relationships with priests in a familial manner and in a less bureaucratic manner. They also emphasized the need for a more open and clear communication about matters such as planning and finances. Chaos continues in the streets of Iran, where anti-government protests rage on against Iran's repressive Islamic regime. That, as a huge fire erupted last weekend at the notorious Evin prison in Tehran, where many political prisoners are held. At least 8 detainees died and dozens of others were injured in the inferno. An estimated 200 more people have died in a brutal crackdown by security forces. The unrest was sparked last month after the death of a 22-year-old woman. The so-called morality police had arrested her for violating Iran's strict rules requiring women to wear hijabs. As Iran intensifies its crackdown on anti-government protesters, it's not just the streets that aren't safe anymore. Authorities are hunting down wounded protesters in hospitals and pharmacies to throw them in jail. Now, Thinking hospitals are a trap, many seriously injured people are not getting any treatment at all. A small underground network of doctors is trying to help. A doctor inside Iran who doesn't want to be identified for his safety speaks through a translator.
As a doctor, I see this as a duty to save people anywhere. When the hospital is not safe, I try to help people on the street, no matter where, no matter what risk. No one should die because of seeking freedom.
Dr. Farhad Razai, an international relations expert and author of several books on Iran, is closely monitoring the explosive situation there. He joins us now to discuss. It's so great to have you here. You do research for the Philos Project, which advocates for pluralism and positive Christian engagement in the Near East. Your current work focuses on Iran and violations against religious minorities in the Middle East. Can you give us a better understanding of what's happening right now with these protests?
Well, thank you very much for having me. As you just mentioned, the nationwide protest sparked primarily after the tragic death of Montse Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish girl who was arrested by the Islamic Republic's chastity police for not wearing the mandatory hijab. She died in custody because she was brutally beaten, and her death caused rage among Iranians. But that was only a trigger point. Iranians are unhappy with 43 years of the regime's corruption, kleptocracy, and discrimination against minorities, including women. And they're also angry, they're also unhappy with the regime's destructive foreign policy, which basically triggered global and US sanctions. That's what inspired the entire nation. And that's why people are calling for changing the regime rather than changing in a particular policy.
Well, this is not only about women. There are very few women in Iran's parliament. Women are still very much second-class citizens. They're forced into marriages. They have no recourse as victims of domestic violence, and there are very much tight restrictions on acceptable clothing. Is this the first counter-revolution that has to do with women in Iran? Is that what's really at stake here?
That's right. Women in Iran are brutally discriminated against. The Islamic Republic imposes discriminatory Sharia law on them, which basically considers women as the second-class citizens. And this law basically allows the regime to have control over the woman's body, to control over their clothes and their thoughts. So no state should have the right to decide what a woman should do or where or how she should dress. So, as you just mentioned, this is the first revolution in Iran and probably in the whole world that is led by women, because they are the one who are suffering the most. Now they are taking to the streets to fight for their freedom. They're burning their headscarves, which they believe is the most visible symbol of religious apartheid. And it's really important for the free world, especially the United States, to support the women of Iran, to increase pressure on the Islamic Republic, and to hold those people responsible, those who are using violence against women, to hold them responsible and to hold them into account.
Do you see these protests as a launching point for change in Iran? It's not just about women.
Well, in my opinion, the change has already occurred. The Iranian society's relationship with the Islamic Republic, with the regime, has entered a whole new phase. And that cannot go back to what it was before the death of Montse Amini. So there's been a paradigm shift, a big paradigm shift in the Iranian society. And this paradigm shift is, this regime is illegitimate. Its policies cost the whole nation dearly. And more importantly, it cannot be reformed, but should be changed and overthrown via revolution. And this is really important. And the regime cannot put them back into the box. So this is going to continue until the regime collapses. And I believe it's our moral responsibility to help those people in Iran, especially to help the women, to continue their courageous fight against the Islamic Republic.
In knowing that and calling for action, what do these protests mean for U.S.-Iran relations and the prospects of getting the Iran nuclear deal back on track?
In my opinion, the United States should fundamentally reassess its Iran policy. Making a deal with the Islamic Republic, especially at this time, when having such a terrible human rights record, is a very bad idea. And of course, it's counterproductive, because making a deal requires lifting sanctions on the Islamic Republic. And this will enable the regime to fund its coercive apparatus rather than empowering the Iranian women. One last point, the United States should have every incentive to support the Iranian people. For 43 years, Washington has been waiting for this moment, for the moment that Iranians would cease to believe that America is their greatest enemy. That moment is right now. Iranian protesters are shouting, they are lying that our enemy is America. Our enemy is right here. So I believe Biden administration should seize this moment.
It's a worthwhile call to action. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Was it partisan politics or simply her right to practice her religion away from the workplace? That's the question a former TV news director from Nebraska is asking after her employer fired her for violating company policies while collecting signatures for a ballot initiative to ban abortions. Melanie Standiford was terminated after a local Nebraska news website reported she gathered signatures at her church, calling for a vote to make her small Nebraska town a sanctuary city for the unborn. Standiford had been a journalist at her TV station for 5 years, covering many topics of importance to her community. She says her personal pro-life position did not affect what she describes as her balanced reporting on the abortion issue. Standiford says gathering signatures was done at her Lutheran church on her day off. Her firing was a surprise.
I've had a burden taken off of my chest that I didn't even know was there. Now I can speak freely. I can speak completely for pro-life, and I can tell people the dangers of not being pro-life for the unborn and all of the things that go with that. I can be Christian. I can speak freely. I don't know. I do know that there may be a lawsuit so that this doesn't happen to somebody else in the future, because this will set a huge precedent for what can and can't happen for how a person is treated just because of their religion.
Standiford's former employer, Gray Television, says it has a company policy encouraging civic involvement, as long as activities do not give the appearance of interfering with journalistic impartiality. Standiford, a hiring manager herself in her former position, says she was never made aware of such a policy. And some good news for a change for your pocketbook if you're a person who is hearing challenged. Millions of Americans suffering from hearing loss can now get hearing aids online or in stores without a prescription. The FDA says patients no longer have to visit a hearing health professional to get a custom fitting. Its new rule went into effect this week.
The average cost of a pair of hearing aids in the past was about $4,500. I mean, so put that in perspective, that means for the average American, a pair of hearing aids could be your third largest material purchase in life after a house and a car.
While these more economical over-the-counter hearing aids are a great option for those with mild to moderate hearing loss, for others with more severe hearing loss, prescription hearing aids are still the only option.
For the first time in history, the image we have created on the shroud lacks the influence of an artistic movement.
The realism of his sacrifice for mankind. A new exhibit in Spain takes clues from the Shroud of Turin to create a super true-to-life image of Christ after death. That report in a moment. The realism of a new exhibit about the death of Jesus Christ could be considered jarring, yet its depiction of crucifixion also teaches us much about the sacrifices our Lord made for our salvation. The exhibit is based on a study of the Shroud of Turin. Reporter Colin Flynn takes us to Salamanca Cathedral in Spain.
For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has become one of the most mysterious and controversial pieces of cloth on the face of the planet. For some, it's a hoax, or it's an ordinary person who came to their demise in some brutal way. But to others, it represents something truly remarkable. And now, for the first time, experts have spent years recreating what they believe to be the mystery man under the shroud. The mysterious Shroud of Turin is something that has baffled scientists for years and been a source of great wonder to faithful all over the world. And now, here at the Cathedral of Salamanca in Spain, a new exhibition has been launched that aims to portray, like never before, the body that was wrapped in that shroud. Inside the cathedral, the exhibition is on display, showing various paintings and items to illustrate the last days of Jesus' life. Alvaro Blanco is a Spanish art expert and the man behind the entire project.
What makes this exhibition special is that after 14 years investigating the Holy Shroud, we have reached a point where it's no longer a debate of science, but more a debate of reality. We know that the shroud was wrapped around a body of a man, and now we have reproduced that man.
Much work has been done throughout the centuries to try and confirm or disprove the authenticity of the actual Shroud of Turin, but never before has such painstaking work been put into recreating a life-sized model of the man who would have been under it.
For the first time in history, the image we have created on the shroud lacks the influence of an artistic movement. It is not Romanesque, it is not Gothic, it is not Michelangelo, it is not Renaissance, no. This is reality, it's hyper-realism.
At the end of the exhibition is what the organisers are calling the hyper-realistic figure of the mystery man. And in front of the waiting press and local dignitaries, the figure is unveiled to the world. The figure is an extraordinary piece of work, looking incredibly lifelike. The hyper-realistic sculpture, which is made of latex, silicone and real human hair, has been based on data collected from the Shroud of Turin.
La piel se hunde, la piel, el vello es humano. The skin sinks. The hair is human. It weighs 75 kilos. It behaves like a person. It is real, right? I think this has been a big risk because we did manage to create successfully the image of the man under that shroud.
Even the head has wounds and blood, the suggestion being that they're from the crown of thorns. The exhibition is not claiming that this is the figure of Jesus Christ, or not. It wants people to visit and view it and come to their own conclusion of who the mystery man is. But for its creator, Alvaro Blanco, after working on the piece for so long, the answer to him is obvious.
Perhaps the answer is as simple as we have been told, that we are looking at the sacrifice of a person made in an act of love, in an act of kindness, and in which he left that holy shroud as a memory.
Interesting to note that the Catholic Church does not officially endorse or reject the Shroud of Turin. The exhibition will now begin its tour around the world, and its creator told me today that he is hoping the people who come to see it will be profoundly moved, having seen for the first time in such a realistic way the portrayal of the body, the man of Jesus Christ, who was wrapped in the Shroud of Turin. In Salamanca, Spain, Colin Flynn for EWTN News In Depth.
The Mystery Man exhibit will remain in Salamanca for the next 4 to 6 months, after which the curator hopes to take it to churches around the world. And finally, we celebrate the spread of the good news as missionaries go forth to preach God's word around the globe. Last weekend on World Mission Day, a festival was held at Lateran Palace in Rome as 18 religious men and women received their missionary mandates. This group will head to several countries, including Bolivia, Brazil, the Amazonia, Togo, Uruguay, and Madagascar. Enjoy the celebration honoring their mission in our Images of the Week. And that does it for this edition of EWTN News In Depth. Next week, more information from the Catholic perspective about the midterm elections with a look at governor's races and important state ballot initiatives. I'm Montse Alvarado. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you same time next week for news important to your Catholic life.